Hey everybody, I'm Greg Soul and welcome to another CIQ tutorial. I say tutorial because I'm not necessarily going to demo anything. I'm going to show you some stuff moving around. But today I really want to kind of give you an idea of how to get started automating against network elements. So I know it's very simple to automate against a Linux host because you just put their information in there and go, right? You don't even have to think about it. But networking actually requires a little bit of extra work. And so I kind of wanted to explain that very quickly. So short and sweet video. So I'm going to start by looking at my screen over here. That's my Ascender. We're going to get to that in just a second. So there are a couple of execution types inside of Ansible. You've got local and you've got remote, right? And so traditionally what we're accustomed to is remote execution, right? And so that's going to be going against your Linux host, your Windows host, things like that. And essentially what it does is Ascender will take the modules, the Python scripts, or, in the case of Windows, it'll take those PowerShell scripts. It actually copies it over to that host, executes it, remotely, almost said locally, executes it remotely on, say, that Linux host, and then it deletes those Python scripts when it's done, right? So that it's actually remote execution. And so remote is from the perspective of the Ascender server, right? It's pushing that stuff over and it's executing it over there. Well, a lot of your network elements don't have the ability, well, I would say probably most of them, don't have the ability to actually execute, say, Python scripts directly on them. And even if they could, the Python versioning might, be different. And so it'd be kind of a little bit troublesome to keep track of. So for the most part, you're going to be doing what's called local execution. So local as in, again, from the perspective of Ascender, local being it's going to fire off commands over to that remote system, essentially the same way you would from the CLI, right? It's just going to kind of remote into that thing, generally over SSH or perhaps an API. An API is another example of local execution, right? So if you are making changes to something in Azure or AWS, it's actually going to be connecting to that API. So that's considered local execution, right? It's not like copying files over there and executing them in the cloud. It's really just going to be performing that from the Ascender server itself. So our network elements are going to be doing local execution. Now, why is that important to know? Because you actually have to tell it to do that. So there is an Ansible underscore connection variable that you need to modify for your networking devices, right? And so it's really essentially going to tell it how to communicate with those remote resources. You have network CLI, netconf, HTTP API, right? It just depends on the endpoint you're connecting to on what you need to do. And honestly, if you're unsure, just do a quick Google and you're going to find the results of, hey, this is how I connect to this thing. But for the most part, most of the networking elements I've automated against at least use the network underscore CLI connection type. And so in your inventory somewhere, generally you're going to put Ansible underscore connection :space network underscore CLI. And it's really just telling it, hey, this is a device you're going to issue CLI commands to, right? So it's going to be your Arista stuff, your iOS, your NXOS, your iOS XE, or XR. So it's the vast majority of equipment that is network specific, you're going to be doing network CLI. Now, next, you have to tell it what the network OS is. So essentially, you're saying, what language do I speak to this thing, right? Is it English, French, Portuguese, Spanish, right? You have to tell it how to communicate to this thing. So you have to know what kind of networking device you're going to be connecting to, and you'll say the Ansible underscore network underscore OS variable is iOS, right? Or it's NXOS, or it's EOS, right? You just essentially tell it how to communicate to this thing. And then in our Ascender, say in the variable section, so this is kind of a screenshot of a single host. This one is, I think, one of those virtualized CSR 1000s. So it is doing network CLI. You can see Ansible underscore connection, network CLI. You can also see Ansible underscore host, right? These are all magic variables, all the variables you see here, right? And a magic variable is one that's just known to Ansible, right? It's got a very specific purpose. So Ascender knows what to do with this thing, like to take it and utilize it, right? So Ansible host is, instead of trying to resolve the name, like if I had the name up there in the name spot as a fully qualified domain name, it would just resolve and Bob's your uncle, we're done. Instead, Ansible underscore host is specifying the IP address that it's going to connect to this host with. Again, Ansible underscore connection, network CLI, right? So we're going to be doing CLI-ish commands, and then the network OS, iOS. Now in this one, the CSR 1000 I'm using is kind of old, and so it has some old hashing algorithms that it'll actually and ciphers that it will connect with over SSH. So I add a little bit of extra information to make that work. Most of the hosts you connect into and operate against, this is not a problem, but just understand that you can actually do this if you need to. So let me pop back over to my Ascender. Quick commercial break. So here at CIQ, we absolutely love helping customers build their automation environment as well as their automation practice. We have also become experts in migrating from one flavor of enterprise Linux over to another. I think you know which one is going to be my preferred for you to move to. So if you need help with enterprise Linux or migrations or automation, please give us a holler. Plus, Jimmy's getting bored and he tends to get really annoying when that happens. So I genuinely need your help to keep him busy. So drop us an email. I'm going to go into my inventories. And so while all this stuff is true in Ascender, it's also true on the command line. I just prefer to do everything inside of Ascender because honestly, it makes my life so much easier and it's less to keep track of. And I've got enough of that stuff going on. So I'll take a shortcut whenever I can. So I've got all my inventories, which are big lists of all the hosts I could potentially operate against. I'm going to type network. I've got a network lab one here. So before in the slide example, that was like a CSR 1000. Well, I've also got some virtualized Nexus hosts. So I'm going to come into the host section here. I can see all of my Nexus switches. I'm going to pop into this one right here. And you can see all I have is an Ansible underscore host, right? That's curious. Like you would think that you would see the network OS type specified here as well as the CLI. Well, I can put it for each individual host, or I can do something a little bit more flexible and I can actually add it to a group. So you can see all these are part of the Nexus group. And so if I go into the groups tab instead and I click on Nexus, I can see that I've actually configured the Ansible underscore connection and network OS right here for these hosts. And so I'm a big proponent of, if you are doing networking devices, right, you have a group for each type of device, right? Whether it's iOS, NXOS, EOS, those various things. And then you can put those connection variables right here inside of this, right? It keeps the individual host a little bit cleaner, as well as any host that you add to the system, add to that group, they're automatically going to inherit that stuff. And that can be extremely valuable when you are, say, pulling your inventories from a dynamic inventory source, right? You've got some CMDB, configuration management database, whatever that looks like. I mean, it could be like a CSV file that you're importing into the system, whatever it happens to be, but you're going to map those hosts dynamically into groups. And if you already have these connection information on those groups, right, they're just immediately going to be able to be connected to, right? It's going to make your life so much simpler. So I'm not saying you have to. To me, it's a good practice. On the group itself, add those connection specific details. Now, keep in mind, any variable I specify here, say Ansible Network OS, if I actually specify that on the individual host as well and change it to something else, that will override it. Keep in mind variable precedence. The closer, generally, not always, but generally the closer you get to a host, the higher the precedence level is, right? So it does give you the ability to put in a group big generic sweeping configurations or variables, I should say, and then the individual host can get more granular if you need to. So I hope this kind of bridges the gap for connecting to your network devices. Honestly, this was kind of a weird gotcha for me when I very first got started using Ansible. And this is the vast majority of oddness that I had to get through. So really, it's going to be the Ansible underscore connection and the Ansible network OS. Those are going to be the two big things that you're going to have to think about and make sure you account for. Well, if you have any questions or comments, I would love to hear them. If there's anything else you'd love to see demos on, I'm here and available. This is my job, so please help me keep feeding my family. If you want help with any of this stuff, please reach out to us. So we do some services. We also sell support on Ascender here, right? Enterprise class automation system. We're happy to do all of that stuff as much or as little as you would like. So thanks. Happy automating, happy network automating, and we'll see you next time. Bye.